you a student, mentor, or parent that loves robotics?
Then you're in the right place.
Up-to-date info on all things robotics. This
is the RoboZone Podcast
with your host, Pete Eckman. The RoboZone Podcast is brought to you by Kettering University. It's a Kettering-built world.
Hello and welcome to the RoboZone Podcast. This is the 12th episode of the RoboZone Podcast for Tuesday, April 11th. For this week's episode, I stopped by the RoboZone TV studios. I got the chance to sit down with Dan Kimura and Jim Zondag, co-founders of First in Michigan. So I wanted to sit down, ask them a couple questions, and got the chance. So I hope you liked the interview. Don't forget to listen to us on SoundCloud and iTunes, and please leave us a review. It always helps to promote the podcast, and thank you in advance. So let's get to the interview. I wanted to welcome you to the podcast, and I wanted to thank you for giving me your time. It's, we're all really busy right now, so I greatly appreciate your time. Hopefully we'll get Jim in here today. For people that are just listening to the podcast, some people, audience isn't just people that are watching the season, but just getting to know First. Maybe it's a team, an 8th grader and his dad are listening to a podcast in a car, and they're getting ready for next year when they can compete with us, in our teams. So I wanted to get a little bit of information from your background. So can you tell the listeners a little more about you and how you got involved with First Robotics?
So I started all the way back in high school in I want to say 1998. I had to, I guess at my school we do this thing called, what was it called? It was a product team, I think is what they called it. Okay. So it was like a special class that you had to take, and they weren't book studying and stuff like that. So it wasn't like a math class. It would be, there was volunteering for the shelter, or there was an astronomy one. And I, of course, did not pick one in time. So I was in the office picking my product team, I think the day before school started. And this one, First Robotics, had a spot. It sounded interesting, so I joined the team. And then, we had some team changes throughout the years, but 2000 I started, co-founded, I guess, Team 469 Las Guerillas.
Yep. Who's having a really good year this year.
And then they're coming back a little bit. Yeah. I was with them basically from then until 2014. I probably was leading the team. I probably started leading the team around 2006, 7, 8. Okay. It was we had a few people that were in charge then. And then after 2014, I decided to take a break. Okay. So I've stopped by a little bit, offered my 2 cents, and then left the problem for somebody else to solve.
Sure, like a robotics consultant in a way.
Yeah, a little bit. I mean, it's tough because if you're not at the meeting seeing stuff through, then whatever. Some guy shows up and he's like, I think this piece doesn't work quite right. I think you might want to change the design this way. I mean, they still got to solve that problem. It's not. It helps a little bit, I think, but you still got to do the legwork and fix the design.
It's like planting a seed, right? Yeah, planting the seed, then you go away and you see what the fruits that are coming out of that. So thanks for giving me some information and the listeners some information about that. So I know both you and Jim helped found First in Michigan. Tell us a little bit of how the setbacks you guys went through. Gail alluded a little bit to it.
Sure.
But she's the president. I want to know, you have the president and then you have the worker bees type of thing. So can you inform us a little bit more on how that got started?
Yeah, sure. And so when you say co-founded, right, I was one of the people who got asked questions and given stuff to do. Yeah. I mean, that First in Michigan was really driven by Gail Alpert and Francois Castang. Okay. And it was the two of them that it was their project that they saw through, and we were just there to help out, where needed. And it was a big change. So I know some of the first stuff we started working on was what does even this district format look like? I mean, we wanted teams to play more. That was one of the biggest problems. We wanted teams to be able to play locally. And then, the events in Michigan used to be really, really expensive. I mean, it used to be $200,000 to run an event at Eastern Michigan or something like that. Right. I mean, don't quote me on the numbers, but, it was a lot.
You're right in the ballpark from what Gail said.
Yeah, and she knows the real numbers. But so we thought, we can ask people to support in kind. We can find schools that have openings in their gyms. So we knew we could do it at a much lower cost. And I think, now it's somewhere between 10 and 20,000 is the average cost of a district. So it's an order of magnitude less. But at the time, the way things were done, trying to convince other people that we could really find those donations, we could really find those partners to bring the cost that far down. There was a lot of skepticism on that. So we sort of had to, be like, well, I understand it's not what you've seen, but trust us. Let us do it for a year and see what happens. And we had a lot of the teams in the state were kind of reluctant to make the change too. Okay. It's just kind of, you had this system that everybody had been participating in from, 10, 15 years, depending on the team. And it was like, they have this pattern down of sign up for a regional, sign up for Worlds. If you win your regional, you get a spot. There's lots of waitlist spots at Worlds back then. So if you were quick on the waitlist, you had a really good chance of going to Worlds no matter what. And the teams were just kind of comfortable with that. And so it took a lot of, we went and we did town hall meetings, I think, in a few places across the state, and just listened to all of the complaints about the system, all the fears, all the things that people thought might go badly, and we tried to answer them. But when you have such opposed viewpoints, right? Like, you're not gonna convince them offhand. So it was sort of like, we understand that, we think it's worth it because you're gonna get all of these extra plays, your costs go down, and some people had legitimate concerns. The Upper Peninsula teams really kind of had it rough for a while. We've got a couple events up there now, but even still, like, the Upper Peninsula is huge, right? So like driving across there to get to an event is still many hours. But for the first few years, right, there were no events up there. It was like, I think Traverse City was the farthest north event. So we had some teams that used to like going to play in Wisconsin that had to make a 8-hour drive to Traverse City or something. So that was rough for them, and they had to make 2 drives now instead of 1 because they got 2 district events. Sure. But we were trying to say, well, but if you only play at one district, you paid the same price, so you're not really any worse off. And, I think we went through the system for a couple years, and people started to kind of see the value in it. And then, some of the students moved on, too, so we had sort of a new group that didn't know the regional system as well. So it was definitely a few years of working with people, trying to convince them, give us some time, we can make this work.
Well, now that you have our Governor Snyder's backing, which is huge, right?
Yep. And credit again to Gail.
Yeah, credit to Gail. I know Gail will be listening to this. I think she's listened to every episode since I've introduced her to the podcast. Michigan State is right around the corner. We're 2 days away, right? Yep. And I'm going up there on Wednesday night. I'm actually giving a talk about scouting on behalf of my teams, which is going to be kind of cool. A little bit nervous, to be honest with you. I'm used to talking in front of people, but the one thing I've noticed about robotics since I've been in it is people are very analytical. No matter what I'm going to say is not going to be right, but I'm just going with, this is how I do it. You may do it differently. Yeah. So I'm hoping that it's going to be good. In fact, I think it's going to be a good experience for me, so I'm excited. So let's talk a little bit about Steamworks, right? The game has so many multifaceted, game compared to previous games that I've watched and have experienced. So the season has unfolded. Do you think it's unfolded the way you thought when you first learned about Steamworks back in January?
It's pretty close, actually, yeah, to what we sort of predicted. And I did stop by my team's workspace for that kind of kickoff weekend. Okay. We went back and forth on the discussion of, look, rotors are way too many points. If you score the rotors, that's like the amount of effort it takes to get a rotor going, especially one of the first 2 or first 3 even, right, is way less than what it would take to score that many points in fuel. But we sort of talked about how you're going to hit this parity really fast, where like sort of 3 rotors is not too hard, 4 rotors is really hard. So how do you differentiate yourself from the rest of the pack? And it's like, well, you can either just be the best rotor running robot out there and rely on your partner to get you some fuel points to win those tiebreakers, or you got to be able to shoot and score. And we're seeing that sort of be the differentiator at some of our kind of more stacked district events. Some of the other ones are still just pretty much if you can execute the gears and hanging. And that's the other thing. Hanging, we said right away, was like, if you don't hang, you're not going to win.
Do you think hanging's too easy? Because I remember last year hanging was the cum d'etat, if you got it up there, and I think it was that one team would actually scale and shoot a ball when they got up, which was just like a slam dunk in your face. So do you think it's a little bit too easy this year to get up there?
I think that what's happening is because of the way the points layout, the game is probably better for it being easy. I guess you could say that it might be fun to watch a 3-hanger alliance going up. If hanging were really hard, right, and you put together 3 hangers, that could be a strategy that you could play. Maybe get like 2 rotors, play defense, and hang to win. I think that would have been a more boring game to watch. And I think hanging too, like when the challenge was proposed, right, when we saw it on kickoff, hanging did not seem easy.
No, it didn't.
Finding out how to sort of acquire the rope was the challenge. I think everybody knew. I mean, there are even competitions out there that, if you don't know about this, you should have known about this on kickoff, but there are rope climbing robotic competitions or climbing rope competitions out there. So you can look and you can see all these designs of how robots, can climb up and down ropes, or we've done poles before. It's not that dissimilar. So I think once you acquire the rope, it's a pretty easy task. I mean, you winch yourself up. Teams know lots of different ways to stop it from backdriving. And even with the way the rules are, even if it does backdrive, you're okay, right? You hold it up till 0 seconds, and then you fall back down, and that's fine. But acquiring the rope seemed really, really hard until, I don't know what update it was, a rule update came out that more or less allowed for Velcro to be sewn onto the ropes. And then what we saw was a lot of teams finding out that, if you put Velcro and you just kind of mess up the bottom of your rope and you get one of the soft nylon ropes or something like that, you're going to be able to just kind of latch right on.
I think it was update 7, if I want to remember.
It sounds about the right time.
6 or 7.
Right, and I know it was a robot in 3 days, had the Velcro climber, and there were all these questions of, will that be legal? Can we do that? And then kind of once that filtered through as being okay, we saw a lot of teams pick that up very quickly and go with it. So I think it was supposed to be harder, but I think that the game is better for it not being harder.
Okay. It makes sense. Now, you mentioned defense. I'm a prior sports coach, football and lacrosse in the past. So I love defense. So tactics have changed this season as the season's gone on, and defense is now on the rise, right?
Yep.
You guys commented the last week's episode that just came out this last Sunday about defense becoming more of a thing. Do you expect to see that in the state championships as one of the main tactics that people start doing?
I think it's still the smartest way to play the game. So some teams are going to employ that, but you always get a variety of strategies going in. So you're going to see 3 strong offensive robots paired together, and they're just going to decide, whatever, let the other team do what they want. If they score points, that's fine. We're going to score more. So we'll see some of that. The big trump card, though, is the 4 gears, right? If you're paired together with maybe a couple of high goal shooting robots, fuel bots, that can run gears, but you go for 3 and then start shooting. If you don't apply some pressure to the other team, you're kind of risking them getting that 100-point bonus at the end, which is enough to kind of, that's a lot of fuel, right, to get 100 points. You get 40 KPA, you get the 20-point bonus, but that's still only 60 points, and that 4th rotor is 140. So
and that's where your defense comes into play, is blocking those guys.
Yeah, so I think you got to be smart. You got to at least have your 3rd robot trying to slow them down. And as we get deeper in the tournament, I think teams are going to be smart enough to know, to have scouted, how much defense you have to play, right? Because the best amount of defense to play is sort of just enough. If you're playing against a 4-rotor team, right? It's just enough that they don't get 4 rotors. If you play more defense than that, you're taking away from making sure you get your 3 rotors and the extra fuel points to give you the advantage. So we saw that's one of the reasons why 9-10 was so impressive last week, and we talked about them at their events, is they seem to play defense at the right times in the right places effectively. And that's something that we will see more of, I think, at the state championship. But a lot of teams that haven't played defense yet this year are going to have a hard transition to make there. And so we've got a lot of, the state championship, right, is the best of the best. So now your 3rd robots on your alliances at the state championship are not going to be sort of the most functional robot left, or the one robot that can hang.
Right.
And we hope they can play some defense. These are going to be guys that have been running, 3, 4, 5 gears cycles, or they may even be a robot that's shooting balls. Then you might get your fuel robot in the 3rd round, depending on how your division shakes out. So for those robots, being able to transition from that offensive role to that defensive role and be effective and not take penalties for it is going to be kind of where they separate themselves.
The magic question this week has been, or the last couple weeks since we found out that we're going to the divisional format, is who's in what division? Is there going to be a power division? I'm not saying there is or isn't. I'm just saying I know that you guys have been working on that. Gail was talking about that when I interviewed her, and that there was a method to the madness, if you want to say. And you guys alluded to that a little bit last week. And it's coming out tomorrow. I think the things are coming out tomorrow. Yep. So it'll be actually, when people are listening to this, is today, because we're going to release this on Tuesday. So do you have any little tidbit of like a little breadcrumb you can throw out there?
I mean, I have no idea who will end up in what division. I like that First in Manchester is going to run the program for us.
Oh, really?
So we gave them the spreadsheet it's scripted. It does all the steps on its own, but it's in their hands, and they're going to be the ones to press the go button. So
sweet. So takes
there is no
your responsibility
right.
away
There
from
is
you.
no. I am not biased. I am not sneaking teams into divisions. I can't, even if I want to.
Yeah.
It's out of my hands at this point. There's some challenges. We're really concerned with trying to get relatively balanced divisions.
Right.
But we have to use sort of the metrics that are available to us. Mm-hmm. And I think if you look at if you sort of look at the top or the rankings points, the ranking list of points that teams earned from their district play. Like, I think it's a good list, but I don't think there's anybody that would say, yes, that is the top 100 teams from 1 to 100 in that order, right? Because some teams are going to win some tournaments that they got lucky at. Some teams are going to win some tournaments that were maybe easier or harder to win. You might have been the third best robot, but if you go to a district event and you're playing against the best two, right, you're going to have a hard time winning that event. So that's what we have to sort of try to make sure that the divisions stay balanced. But we've definitely got some good robots. I think like 4967, who's Jim and I both think very highly of. I think they've been scoring. I think they might have the highest fuel average in Michigan. It's certainly top 5, so they're way up there. But they didn't win their first event. They won their second event, which puts them in the top quartile of teams, but not the best team. Okay. So we have these teams that maybe are not exactly where they should be on the rankings, and the rankings is sort of what we're using to check to make sure the divisions are balanced. So it's not going to be perfect 100% balance, but I think at the same time, by taking some of the extra steps that we're taking, it's going to be balanced enough, right, that you won't see anything really bad. I think Worlds last year, there was one division that was people felt was extremely stacked, right? Lots of really, really good teams. And we don't want that to happen here with the small divisions. So, I think they're going to be pretty balanced. And the other thing that I care about almost as much is I don't want anything to be predetermined when we do the division split. So, like, I don't think it's fair to say that because you finish number 1 and 2 in the state rankings, you will be in different divisions no matter what.
Okay.
You don't ever want teams to, not have the chance to play with somebody else. And then, if the system is so simple to where, if you end up 9th, you're going to be in the division with the person you want to be in the division with, right?
Yeah.
Like, there's the potential for abuse. Not that any teams would do that. Not that it would be easy to do.
Talking about sandbagging?
Potentially, right? Or it's you want teams to go out and play the tournaments to win the tournaments, and you don't want to have. And as a coach, I wouldn't want to have that on my mind of like, wow, we just screwed ourselves in the division like placement because of whatever just happened.
Right,
So,
and you never want to do that.
Right.
You just want to win
Exactly.
It's to get the blue banner, hang the blue banner, and see what happens and qualify for states.
Yeah, so I really like that there's this random aspect to it. We went back and forth kind of tuning the variables to try to balance the randomness versus the competitive balance. And I think we found a pretty good spot for that.
And I think this is one of those things where you can never get it 100% right because everyone's going to have a different opinion, right?
Yeah,
But
exactly.
the fact that you told us that someone else is running the algorithm and it's going to set it all up, you guys aren't sitting there pushing the buttons.
No, we get no override. It's going to be run one time, and whatever happens,
No
happens.
nuclear option.
Yep. Nope. cannot decide. Oh, I don't like the way these look. We're gonna do it again. So, and we'll definitely be looking at the results, how things shook out, and if needed, make adjustments for the future.
Are you looking forward to the venue? The venue's change. I remember going to going out to Grand Rapids and all of us cramming into what seemed like a mini soccer stadium, and now going to SVSU, which is a beautiful campus. I can't wait to see it.
Yeah, it's probably still going to feel like everybody getting shoved into a tiny space. It's really tough. I know that like a lot of this stuff happened late in the season or was announced late. It's definitely been being worked on for a while. It's hard to find a venue that's big enough for what we need. And the bottom line was just that 102 teams that fit at the Deltaplex was just starting to represent too small a percentage of the teams in Michigan.
Sure.
We're like 450 teams this year. That's less than 25%. That's a really tall task to get to the state championship. And one of my favorite things of going to districts and having the state championship was a lot of these teams that used to go to their one regional, maybe their two regionals a year, and finish quarterfinals, semifinals. They're not really winning the events. a lot of those teams would leave at the end of the year with sort of like, well, I guess we made the semifinals. And that was sort of like, there was no great metric for their success or for their, for them to target to improve.
Sure.
And when the state championship came out, it did take a couple years. We tried to build up the prestige of the event, and I think it's reached that point. But now, a lot of teams just talk to me like at the beginning of the year, like our goal is to make states. And you want that to be an attainable goal for a lot of teams. You want that to be something that, these teams that try hard and have a good year can attain. And if you start getting down to, 20, 15, maybe 10% of teams make states, then it's going right back to the, it's only for the best of the best, the very elite teams. And so it had to get bigger. And Saginaw Valley State was the one place we found that could fit sort of what we needed, which is 160 teams this year. Even that, I think we would have liked to go a little bit bigger. The stands is the hard part. Finding enough room for people to sit in the bleachers is just really rough. So I know we're spending more money than I think anybody wanted to bring in bleachers for half of the arena to try to get as many seats in there as we can. And lots of things are still trying to be worked out, sorted out here at the last minute, but I think it's going to be a good event.
And not only that for this year, but next year we have Worlds being held here in Detroit, not too far from where we're sitting right now, and that's going to be an amazing event that's going to be planned. And I can only imagine it's going to be like states on steroids, kind of.
Yeah, so I keep saying they should set up a week early. We should just play states at their venue,
we'd save some money that way, I think.
I don't know. It's probably costs $1 million or something to rent out Kobo for the week, but maybe.
Or you run states and Worlds in the same week. You do states the first weekend and Worlds the second weekend.
Right. That would be good, but I don't. Yeah. So we're really starting to become kind of the center of a lot of these late season events. Michigan State Championship, of course, is the biggest of the district championships because we have the most teams, and then one of the two world championships, right, coming here to Detroit.
So Michigan's the biggest. It has the most first teams, FRC teams in the country. How fast do you think it's going to catch on for the other states to get to that level?
It sort of depends, right, on the state. So we've seen some good growth in some of the other states. Texas and Minnesota, I think, have had pretty strong growth in the last at least several years. I don't know about last year to this year, but the district helps, right? The district format helps.
Yes.
You get much more value for your money. You sort of get. It's never fun to play one regional, lose, and go home and be done for the year, right? Like, what did you spend all this time building the robot for if you're going to play, 8 matches and go home, right?
And the
it's just no fun.
Money and
right.
all that,
Yeah, so you need to sort of get enough chances to play with the robot to make it worth the effort. So the district format helps with that situation, right? Like, at least you get to play twice. In Michigan this year, a little over a third of the teams are going to get to play a third time at the state championship. So those things kind of help from the value end. The state money, of course, is huge. We've been putting that to good use. And then I don't think any other states right now have a Gail Alpert who gets that state money into the hands of the teams and does what they need to do. So
I think she's one of a kind of a Mona Lisa of First Robotics.
Absolutely. And a lot of people know about her ability to sort of find funding for teams and get teams started. But, there is sometimes this argument of if you grow too fast, they're not going to be sustainable teams. And some of the stuff that she does that goes unnoticed is I actually partnered with her to do rookie workshops. So this year we had, I don't remember the number, we had over 40 rookie teams coming to these workshops at the beginning of the year. We took them through a whole build. They were cutting metal, drilling holes, riveting, motors, chain, the whole thing. We went through this thing with basic tools, getting them kind of acquainted with how robots get built. Did a little bit of a programming primer. So, that's the other side of it is we're trying to create this support and finding mentoring teams for everybody, finding somebody that will actually be there to answer their questions. And I think those pieces need to get put in place for other areas to grow as fast as Michigan is growing. But I think the district model alone is going to help fuel some of that growth.
Off the top of your head, do you know who the second biggest state is?
I think it's California still.
Okay.
But obviously they
Based
have a huge
population
advantage. There's a couple of the smaller northeastern states, which I think are very high percentage-wise or per capita. But it's hard to compare, right? Like, it's sort of a completely different ballgame to to have a state like, Rhode Island, where you're trying to start a bunch of teams, or Massachusetts, which is not, huge, versus Texas or California, or even Michigan. And we kind of fit in the middle, so we've got our own sort of, situation, and everything takes a different plan, right? You got to sort of view what you have available to you and how you can approach that.
So I don't want to take up too much more of your time, because I know you guys got to go over into the big studio and do the TV show. A lot less. I think this podcast are a lot less intimidating. So I can't wait to get Jim in here, because sometimes I see him on that camera and I can see him tense up a little bit. I've talked to Jim outside, of course, of this or the TV show, and Jim can get going. So I'm hoping I get a little bit of that gold right there. If there was one memory that you have, the most strong memory that you have of First Robotics ever, that you've ever, since you've been with it, do you know what it is?
Wow. I don't know. I don't know if I have one in particular. I mean, I guess probably if you look back at the first year I did it, when I was still a high school student, I think it just kind of blew my mind that there was this competition, and I was really competitive, right? I did sports. I played, soccer, track, baseball. I did lots of sports. So it's just like when I found out that, hey, we can have the same sort of competition, but like you get to like think and build stuff to do it. That was really cool for me, and I think that's that sort of got me hooked.
Thank you for your time, Dan. You got to get ready. Oh, hey, Jim, how are you?
Good to see you, Pete.
I see you, too. Dan's off the hook.
Okay.
I got some questions for you.
Yeah.
Dan, you can feel free to stay if you'd like to.
Well, we tested the levels, and it works.
Yeah.
So it seems safer. But
Just let me sign back on here.
So you having fun doing this year?
Oh, I love this stuff.
Good. Was this kind of an upgrade for you? I don't know what you were doing before, but we thought tying it in with this show would be sweet.
Very similar. This setup is a lot better than the setup I have at home, but I pieced mine together with my own money, so it was kind of cool. So, Jim, thanks for joining us. We have Jim Zondag here, infamous from Team 33, the Killer Bees. I have a bunch of questions for you. Dan was nice enough to go a little in depth into these. Tell the listeners a little bit more about you and how you got started in First Robotics.
Yeah, that's a long story. So my background prior to doing robots is I grew up in rural Ontario, learned a lot about machines and stuff growing up on a farm, and then started racing bicycles when I was probably 13. Eventually moved to dirt bikes, motorcycles, did a brief episode with cars for a little while, working on a pit crew on a racing team.
Oh, wow.
Summer job I had in college that they did race cars. So really like wrenching and competitive sports. And then went on electrical engineering career path and ended up building a robot as my senior design project, sonar guided robot as my senior design project in my senior year of college. And then I started working at Chrysler, and shortly after I started working at Chrysler was when First Robotics first came to Michigan in 1996. And then a guy that I worked with essentially knew about it and said, "You made robots or something when you were in college, didn't you?" And asked me if I wanted to join. And I said, "Sure, I think I can do that." And I joined the team as the electrical guy in the first year, and rapidly became in charge of the team, and I've been doing it ever since. Yep.
And they have nothing but fun, right?
Yeah, nothing but fun. Actually, I'm kind of a hard fun kind of guy, and First certainly has plenty of that. Right?
It does. And we talked about this with Dan a little bit, that you guys helped form First in Michigan, and I asked him what some of the things that held you guys back, or what the tribulations that you guys had to go through. From your aspect, was it easy peasy, or
no? It wasn't easy peasy. In fact, I was pretty sure that we would sort of get rejected in the first foray into it, because we were trying to change some fundamental things about the way First competitions were formatted and arranged that had really long history in them, right? Already then it was 2008. We started talking about it maybe even in the end of 2007, I think, right? So in 2008, already First had been operating for, 15 years or more at that point. So there were some longstanding traditions, and we were really challenging some of those things. And retrospectively, I think the Great Recession of 2008, 2009 was one of the best things that ever happened to us, actually, because it mostly made it about finances, really. That really wasn't our prime goal, but it was always a goal to reduce the operating costs of First. And really what happened is when the sponsor base eroded, GM, Ford, Chrysler, everybody filed for bankruptcy around here. We lost a lot of the primary sponsorship for all of our regional events. And I think that really encouraged First to let us take a chance on doing a self-funded model, with decentralized funding, right?
Oh, yeah. And fundraising is still a mainstay in running a team. I'm sure you.
Yeah, it is. I mean, first, it's expensive, but most machine sports are, right? Again, right. I had some experience racing cars and motorcycles, and if you race cars, you go to Milan or something. It's easy to spend $1,000 a day on tires, right? That's
easily.
very easy.
Maybe a tire.
Yeah, maybe a tire, exactly. So depending on what classic car you run. So a lot of machine sports are expensive. First, but gratefully, it seems like the private sector is really behind it. And most of the teams, I think, who get organized enough to put, fundraising campaigns together seem to be able to make it work and be able to fund to the level of participation that they desire, almost no matter where they're from, because there's good examples of that in urban areas, in suburban areas, in rural areas all over the country.
And just seeing Kettering was sponsored by Ford, the two Kettering events that we were at, and that was a huge to see Ford, and they're taking an initiative in STEM to cultivate those people to bring them into the company. And you work for Chrysler, so I'm sure you guys do the same thing, and GM does the same thing.
Yeah, we do. And I really think more and more companies who sponsor First and First teams are starting to look to this as, not only is it community service and outreach and a lot of the benevolence that they try to pour out through their foundations, but a lot of companies are starting to view it as a recruiting angle, really, right?
Yeah, it is.
Yeah.
Makes a lot of sense. So let's talk a little bit about Steamworks.
Yeah.
Right? So I asked Dan this, and he gave me his viewpoint. Has the season unfolded the way you thought it would? I know you're a stat guy. You're a numbers guy. I always joke around about the...
It pretty much has. I was really expecting this game. This game has a couple of plateaus in it, very obviously. And some of the things that have happened... actually, I was surprised... Less teams than I even thought seem to pick up on the fact that balls are necessary as a tiebreaker, right? They really are. They're really the only one. A lot of teams will come up and ask us, why'd you choose to do balls? And it was really that is, there's two things. In qualifying, there's an RP available if you shoot balls that is not available any other way. If you can get that, even though it's incredibly hard to do, you can get ahead in the standings just by virtue of that fact alone. And then in the playoffs, it is one of the only things that breaks ties. We saw an event this weekend decided by 2 points and an event decided by only 1 point. So it really is something that I expected that very few teams would do it. I expected maybe more than we actually saw because it's worth so little. I expect, again, defense, you're really starting to see smart defensive play. It's not necessarily particularly violent or anything like that. It's just smart blockading defense, teams actually working together to play patterns is actually starting to unfold in the recent weeks. And we expected that. And there are some teams who are playing that type of angle remarkably well.
That was the next question I was going to have for you. What are the lottery numbers for tonight, if you can read my mind? Because you already nailed the defense question. What's the Powerball number? I'm just joking.
Okay. So I'm seeing the future a little bit.
A little bit.
Okay.
So I asked Dan, and I like defense. I'm a sports guy, so defense wins championships. You said it last week on the show. Do you think we're going to see a lot more of that coming here this coming weekend at Michigan State?
Yeah, I really think so, because what you're really going to have is, unlike in most of the districts and regionals, you're going to have really deep benches in this. We already know who is going to states, right? The lists were pretty much solidified. It may change by one or two teams if not everybody accepts the invitations, but even if you reach down to the half dozen teams in the bubble, you pretty much have the same stats. Pretty much all of the teams are going to have 3 hangers, right? When we look at it, like we ran a quick assessment, like we have over 100 teams that have what we would class as a reliable hanger at states. So since 96 teams are going to the playoffs, you can pretty much bet that once we get into the playoffs, everyone will hang. You'll be at parity. So it's really going to be about how you play the game, whether you allow the opposing alliance to score 4 rotors or not, and essentially, doing the switch-up defense like we saw at some of the late week districts, right? Teams will commit to scoring their 3 rotors quickly and then try to choke off their opponents and try to keep them from scoring 4.
And that's when the shooters come into play, right?
That's where the shooters come into play because honestly, like a lot of games that we've had in first, there's a premium on autonomous. There's effectively no way to defend autonomous scoring, right? So you come out of the shoot, if you're ahead of the other guys coming out of autonomous and you don't gather any penalties in your gameplay, it's pretty much yours to lose at that point.
Right.
So exactly whether you can, but if the teams who then see that they're at a disadvantage coming out of autonomous, they really don't have too much, they can try to defend you out, but the real course of action is going to be to try to run for 4 rotors, and are you going to let that happen or not? And properly applied defense, I think, will really win the tournament.
So you can literally cripple an alliance just by scoring as many points in autonomous as possible.
Yeah, you can, right? So, but of course, there will be many alliances trying to do that. So we'll have to see what people say. There's a pretty short list of shooters, but shooters isn't the only way. We saw at some of the regionals. I don't think it happened in Michigan that anyone got 3 gears in autonomous, but it has happened.
Shepherd.
Did it happen at Shepherd?
I don't think they got.
Okay. They didn't get them up?
No, it'll pick you up. It'll pick you up.
I don't think they got both rotors started, but I think they scored all 3 gears in autonomous. The pilots were just too slow.
Okay. So again, if that type of thing starts happening, we have many teams at states who can score a gear in autonomous. Many. So if you start having, you don't necessarily have to shoot the balls. You just have to score more than the other team in autonomous. So if you can figure out how to get 40 bonus points in autonomous,
Scout the pilots.
that's
Scout
the pilots, right? Scouting the pilots, scouting the defense. Those are a lot of things that people don't scout. Scouting the pilots, scouting the robots for which position they can score from. Just because they have a side gear autonomous, is it left? Is it right? Right? There's a lot of dimension to this.
Everyone fights for the center because it's the easiest.
The center is the easiest, and many teams will have the center one. The side ones will be much lesser percentage.
And then you have the handful of shooters that can actually shoot in autonomous. You're one of them. The 2337 is another.
Yep.
I talked to Clinton Bollinger last week.
Okay. Yeah. 2337 is good. That one team is amazing. Strike Force is good. But we saw guys like 910. We've seen who else? 302. There's a bunch of them. The Martians both shoot. So there's a lot of shooters. It's whether or not they can get enough for it to be worth it. Because really, you have to. You're playing against 20. You're going to have to get the 20-point bonus gear on your side every time. So then if you're the shooter guy, you have to have a guy who gets the middle one. Is it better than trying for 3 gears? There's some tension in the game, and it'll probably come down to just a few points when you get down to it.
Right. Me personally, I like the 3-gear autonomous because you already have one up. You have a second rotor spinning automatically.
Yeah.
And you're already kind of ahead for that third. So if you get 3 gears, then you have a shooter that shoots high and put as many balls in the top as possible.
Yeah.
So I threw a curveball at Dan.
Okay.
So I said, quote, do you think hanging this year is too easy? Do you think hanging is too easy this year?
To talk about hanging has good crowd appeal. I think it's overvalued in the game is actually my opinion. Well, I have this. So I design games for Okra. I've been running the Okra Game Design Committee for 18 years, and I've been on the Vexed Game Design Committee for a couple years in Texas. And, I have some tenets that I work by, but one of the things that I do is the 10x factor. I never let anything in the game be worth 10 times more than anything else in any game that I've ever designed. And why? Because it tends to break the game. It will tend to make it so that it becomes too much about the bonus and less about the rest of the game. This game has something that's literally worth 450 times more than something else, which is kind of absurd if you think about it. And I think really when you look at it, it's maybe not as bad as it looks because scoring a couple gears is worth 40 and hanging is worth 50. But it's very, very hard to get more than 150 points through any means other than shooting balls, which has extremely low return. So I don't think that the hanging is actually undervalued, is overvalued. I actually think that shooting balls is undervalued.
Yeah.
If shooting balls had been worth several times more than it is, like if they had been worth 1 point apiece, say in teleop, and they'd been worth 3 points in autonomous, this would be an entirely different competition. It would be an entirely different competition.
And the competition's kind of changed as this season's gone on, right? People were just trying to hang gears. I remember the 2 weeks at Kettering, I didn't see a single ranking point from hanging gears because no one could get 4 rotors to spin.
Yeah.
And then we went to Lansing, which had the most 4 rotor spins of any competition yet this year, I think.
I think that's still true.
I think there were 16 matches that had
16.
4 rotors. So you saw a lot of gears being put on, not a lot of defense until, and I actually don't think you see a lot of defense until the playoffs start. Because people are just trying to qualify.
People are trying to qualify and get as many ranking points as possible, but obviously you get 2 for winning. So we'll see how strategic people play in the qualifying rounds. I think, like, my assessment on it is this: it's all about the makeup of the population, right? If you're going to get that third rotor, you really only need to run 3 gears to get the third rotor. So if you have 1 good robot, that can be achieved. But in order to get 9 gears, you pretty much need all 3 members participating, or you need 2 fantastic robots. Because getting 5 or 6 cycles of anything with your robots is pretty hard to do. Just traffic and choreography and any amount of defense can start cutting into that, trying to get 9 cycles in with just 2 guys. But the moment you have a third robot contributing to that, well, it's 3 apiece. It's really not that hard. So obviously the other alliance still has to let you do it. But I think at states you're going to have it where there will be many matches in qualifying in which all 3 robots can score 3 or 4 gears. And I think you'll start seeing the opportunity to get 4 rotors happening way more often than we've seen in the tournament so far.
I think it's cool. I like seeing the gears being pulled up, and we got some cool footage a couple weeks ago at that event where you could actually see them pulling it out, and it was kind of cool to see.
Yeah, it's an interesting dynamic. It's an interesting dynamic. It's there's definitely been some evolution on the makeup of the springs and the material of the springs. And they have improved them a lot, so I applaud first for that, because really in the opening weeks, right, they were sagging just naturally as they put them on, and the gears would slide off the end. It seemed like, whatever they had at the home office, certainly what we had on some of the fields in the early weeks, was clearly a little more saggy, and it was really hurting teams' abilities to actually score. And I'm glad that they made the upgrades that they did.
Yeah, and I think they did everything except for literally melting the tips into the spring to get them to stay, because you just saw the tips just fly out of it. Again, with the tip, I think they want it to come off if it gets hit too hard, I think. There's a lot of ways that they probably could have permanently done that. But, I mean, we even had it with ours when they went and they put the conduit in. Yeah, early in that tournament, we actually broke something on our robot that had survived through the previous 2 tournaments because the spring is now so stiff that it can impale things. So, there's a reason for maybe making some of that stuff break away. Yeah. Right. I appreciate your time, Jim, and Dan. Dan's still sitting in here with us. The one question I have left for you, and you've been around First for a very long time, and I asked Dan about this. It took him a couple seconds to think about it. If you have one distinctive memory of First Robotics from everything that you've ever experienced that you just keep in the back of your mind and it just flashes when you think about it, what is that memory?
One memory. Wow. I still 2013 I really loved Ultimate Ascent. So we went to Waterford District at the first tournament in Ultimate Ascent, and one thing with Ultimate Ascent, like we had a great time doing the development of the Frisbee shooter, right? And we sort of had an overkill is underrated type approach to it. We just kept making a device that threw harder and harder and harder and harder during the development. But there's always a lot of anticipation in, going to your first tournament. You don't know how the game would be played. So we took the robot out, and when we went out to test it at the first the first practice match, we went out to test it. And we ran a 7-disc autonomous, and that thing shot the Frisbees at 70 miles an hour. And there was a whole line of people standing on the sidelines, waiting to see what the Killer Bees had. And afterwards, a lot of people were like, holy cow, that is the most unbelievable thing I've ever seen. And we had become sort of acclimated to it after working on it for the last month and a half. But really just... I think the satisfaction of, it wasn't even about winning. It was just that we built something that basically was operating at our highest expectation levels of performance, and the effort that students had put in and to bring that thing to light and how well it worked and how impressed all of our fans were. That really sticks in my mind. That was really, really good, right? And we did a lot of winning with that robot that year.
Almost
with the Las Guerillas, actually.
Almost kind of like Tron, almost, right?
Almost,
the
yeah.
disc that you throw at it.
Yep.
I want to thank both of you guys for giving me your time. I know you got to go shoot the TV show.
Yep.
And I'll see you guys at States.
Yeah.
So thank you
absolutely.
very much for
Thank you,
stopping
Pete.
by. I greatly appreciate it.
Thanks for listening to the RoboZone Podcast with your host, Pete Ekman. Find us online at RoboZoneTV.com and on Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, and Instagram.